Ciao a tutti, it's Aram, and what is the best deck in hard format? That is a pretty damn good question with not one answer. There's a few who are gonna get there, but first off, subscribe for every subscriber. Uh, Necro Valley will get popped by Ancient Fairy Dragon. But second of all, like before we get into that question, we need to first establish what the decks matchups are. Now I've gathered this data with my site artifact hotformatmeta.com. I don't know why I said artifact first. Hotformatmeta.com. We have stats, and you can also check just the topping lists. And with this, by comparing and contrasting, you can kind of check. You can filter by engines, which is how I got different data for cat and hat. But yeah, like I was originally gonna look at tournaments and what how the top got related to what decks how what decks got represented and how that related to what decks stopped. And if that's interesting, I'm gonna make a video on that. Get this video to 50 likes, and I will get to making that video. But for now, I'm just gonna, I've gathered the data, and I've got a bunch of matchup spreads. And I've made a matchup spread video before, but this is more accurate because I had to research this quite a bit first. And also it's only looking at cat, hat, Girgias, Murmels, and also the tier 1.5 decks in Bujis and Spellbooks. And we have the Ojama Blue as the representative for the tier 2 decks. The average tier 2. Obviously not every tier 2 deck is going to have the same matchup versus the top dogs, but there's a common through line. There's average stuff, and there's averages and stuff. So cat has a great spellbook matchup. um, and he's generally very good into most tier 2 decks, pretty much all of them except a few decks that counter it. Then it also has a good Bujin matchup and a good Merle matchup, and it has a bad matchup into Hat, although that kind of depends on what tech cards the Hat player is playing. If they're playing Maxis, it's gonna be a whole lot easier than if they're playing Diddy Crows, and um, Hat players tend to differ on how many copies of Breakthrough Skill they play, so that also changes things quite a bit. But and then it also has a pretty bad Geargia matchup, which is kind of to be expected. And Hat has also great spellbook matchup and a great cat matchup. There's a good Merman matchup and a generally good tier 2 Dex matchup. And Mulet has a mid Bujin matchup. Strangely enough, wasn't something that I saw coming. And a mid Girga matchup. It's definitely better than for Cat, but it's still not great. Then for Girga, I didn't count Girga and Girga hands as separate decks. The hands don't change the matchup chart that much compared to like Cat and Hat. But it has a great Cat matchup, a good Hat matchup. Then it averages out a bit worse than the other decks here versus the average tier 2 deck. It has a lot more bad matchups. Mostly the combo decks. And it has a mid Bujin matchup, a mid normal matchup, and a bad spellbook matchup. Then Mermels has pretty much the most balanced matchup spread. You have it's good into Mermels and also the average tier 2 deck. It's 50-50 into spellbooks, which is kind of rare in the top decks of the format to have a 50-50 matchup. But the decks attack each other on different vectors, pretty much like Mermels trying to aggro out, and spellbooks are trying to um, get advantage. Fate isn't that effective versus Mermels. Um, but Mermels also their removal isn't too effective versus spellbooks at the same time. So um, then you have a mid Bujin matchup and also Cat and Hat. I did not expect the data to give Cat and Hat pretty much the same win rate versus Mermal as Mermal versus Gyugyas. But for Mermals, you do have to take into account that there's a skill issue with layers of the deck. Mermals and spellbooks are significantly harder to play than Gyugyas, Hat, and Bujin. and Mermal even more than spellbooks. So I've kind of taken that into account, but at the same time, the data could be skewed more than I'm thinking. So keep that in mind. But the reason why the Mermal matchup versus Yoga is not as good as it seems is because you're stopping the deck's best play, but Yoga has a lot of plays to counter Mermals. First of all, it can aggro out. Second of all, it can ramp out, and third of all, it can floodgate out. So in games 2 and 3. So Kyrgia definitely has a lot of win conditions versus Mermals, even if popping armor is very strong. Then for the books, for the tier 1.5 decks, books have an auto win matchup versus Bujin, great versus Kyrgias and the average tier 2 deck. Though really depends here. 50-50 versus Mermals and the bad cat and hat matchup. Meanwhile, Bujins have um, great tier 2 and below matchup, and also a great hat matchup. Have a good Gilga matchup and a good Mermal matchup. Did I get that one wrong? Maybe. Yeah, it's supposed to be a mid matchup versus hat, I think. Sorry, a good matchup, not a great. Anyways, um, a bad cat matchup and an Nautilus spellbook matchup. And something that makes a difference between the tier 1.5 decks and the tier 1 decks is that both of them have a bad cat matchup, really bad. So you know, none of these other dead of these tier 1 decks have a really bad matchup versus the other tier 1 decks, except for cat, which is very relevant. And then the tier 2 decks, they generally on average are better versus Geargas than versus the other decks. But they tend to struggle versus cat and books because a lot of them are normal summon reliant, and they tend to struggle on versus Bujin because Bujin is an asshole. Fuck Yamato. That is what the average player will say. I kind of like facing Yamato, but I also had to play that decks that fit it. So I've created this handy dandy little chart. Probably could expand it further, but you know, pretty much the best decks depends on the room. So if most people are bringing Yurgia and Hat or any sort of artifact traptrix decks, and not a lot of people are bringing Mermels, Books, Bujins, other variant decks, you have a Yurgia tier one, Yurgia best deck format. This is like money tournaments without where people are kind of tryharding, but they aren't great at it, so they don't or they don't want to play harder decks. So they default to Girga and Hat. So kind of like 2014 type shit. So Girga, best deck in the room in that kind of format. Then you have the semi-varied turn room. You have a lot of Hat, a lot of Girga, a lot of Mermals like and Cat. Say like 50% of the playing room is playing a tier 1 deck, and the other 50% is playing like books and Fujins and tier 2 decks. um Cat is gonna be the best deck because it's very nice into the other tier ones, but it's also very nice into uh the other decks. uh if there's not a lot of books and Fujins though, then Merrill might have a claim for that spot, but yeah, depends also on how many cat players there are. If there's more cat players, if there's a lot of cat players and book or Bujin players, then hat is gonna be better. Especially books. Bujin is not so much. But if there's a lot of like hat, Gilga, Mermels, and tier 2 decks, then Mermel is gonna be the best deck. And so let me just add that real quick. Um, uh, yep, Mermels. Oh shit. Should probably edit this out. But yeah, if yeah, to make to give Mermels a bone here, because in fairness, I didn't really give them any. But then we have the varied environment, and in when the playing field is very varied, Cat is the best deck. Like if there's a lot of if people are bringing pretty much everything, then Cat is the best deck. Um, if if in the lot of people there's a lot of Gilgias, then Mermels kinda are better. But for the most part, you're probably gonna have at least in this situation, there's not gonna be that many Gilgia players. So yeah. Then for in real life tournaments, Infernities is the best deck because you can just cheat and set your monsters. Yeah, that's it from me. Leave a like, join the Discord, subscribe, ring the bell, follow me on Twitter, all that good shit, and goodbye. And remember to like the video if you want to see a video where I go over tournaments and looking at these comparing the results with this chart to make check yeah check how accurate it is. Bye.